An Acceptable Time by Madeleine L'Engle, Chapter 11. The two canoes moved silently across the lake. Tav and Cub paddled in rhythm, making no sound of splashing as the paddles dipped cleanly into the lake, thrusting the canoes forward. Clep lay silently looking at the sky, the velvet dark sky untouched by city lights. The stars were there, but dimmed by a faint mist, and a few patches were blotted out by clouds. Polly huddled into Annabel's sheepskin garment. The night air was cold, and she was still chilled from the long swim. She turned around and looked at Tav, his muscles rippling gently as he paddled. There was no way she could think as Tav thought. She could conceive with her mind a world of gods and goddesses, of Mother Earth, but she could not understand in her heart, except as part of the glorious whole. "Tav," she whispered. "Polly, if Tynak decides that I am to be the sacrifice to the mother—" "No," Tav was emphatic. "I will not let that happen." "But if there is no rain?" "I will not let Tynak hurt you." "But if I come back to you and the people of the wind, and the drought continues, if there isn't any more rain, what would you do then?" The silence was palpable. "Tav, I do not know." His voice was heavy, and for a moment his paddle faltered with a slight splash. "My training is that of a warrior. At home, across the great water, there were people we had captured from neighboring tribes. The mother did not ask us for anyone dear to our hearts." "But you still believe that the mother needs blood to be appeased?" Tav would not know what she meant by appeased, which she had substituted for the unknown Ogham word, so she amended, "The mother needs blood, or she will be angry and withhold rain." "I do not know," Tav said. "The mother has been good to us. Keralis, with his knowledge of the stars, brought us safely across the great water, but the winds were kind. Then we were given a canoe, bigger than this one, and the wind and rain blew us along rivers and into the lake and to the people of the wind. The storm ceased and the rainbow came. I did not die. Keralis is a healer. We blessed the mother and she blessed us. And now the rain is being held back, and even though our land is still green, we will not be able to protect it if the drought continues across the lake. I thought I understood the mother, and I have tried to be obedient to her ways, but now I do not know. I do not know," Polly thought. "I don't know either about the Creator, I believe made everything." She glanced at the sky, and between wisps of clouds the stars shone serenely. "But if I knew everything, there would be no wonder, because what I believe in is far more than I know." "Why, my Polly," Tav interrupted her thoughts, "does this Zack want so much to see the healer across the lake, when the far greater healer is with us?" "The greater healer? Keralis," Tav said impatiently. "Did you not know? Cub has the tribal knowledge of healing, and his hands are learning the gift, as you saw with Bishop." "Yes, but Keralis, who has... how do I say it? But it is Keralis who has... how do I say it? Who has made Cub's gift to grow." Now that Tav was telling her this, it became obvious. Why had she not realized it? Zachary had been so focused, first on Cub, then on the healer across the lake, that Keralis had been pushed out of her thoughts. "I was stupid," she said. "There has been so much happening," Tav defended her. "Shh, we are nearly there." Never before had the mother asked for anyone dear to his heart, Tav had said. She held those words to her own heart. She wanted him to touch her, to tell her that he could care for and protect her, never let anyone put her on the altar to be sacrificed. Could Tav keep his promise to protect her from Tynak? He was as confused in his own way of thinking as she was in hers, and their ways were so alien that it was impossible to think of them as being connected by one of the lines that patterned the stars and the places of benign power and the love between people. If she could not understand his belief that the earth demanded blood, would he not be equally horrified by the slums of modern cities, by violence in the streets, drug-pushing, nuclear waste? How could the star lines be connected to urban violence and human indifference? The two canoes drew together. Animal reached across to hold Polly's hand in a gesture of comfort as well as a way of bringing the two canoes together. Tav stood, balancing carefully, then transferred to the other canoe. Both canoes rolled slightly, but no more. When Tav was seated, he handed a paddle to Polly. "You can turn the canoe?" he asked. "Yes. If you will paddle equally to the right and toward the shore, you will reach Tynak's village." "Right." "Clep," Animal's voice was soft, "give your leg time to heal. Do not use it too soon." "I will be careful," Clep promised. "Do you be careful too. Oh, be careful, be careful." There was a world of meaning in his repetition. "I will," Animal assured him. "I will." "Hold out your paddle," Tav told Polly. Not understanding, she did as he asked. He used her paddle to pull the two canoes so that she and Tav were side by side. With one finger he gently touched his lips, and it was the most marvelous he gently touched her lips, and it was the most marvelous kiss she had ever been given. She reached out and touched his lips in return. "Ah, my Polly, go." He gave her paddle a quick shove. Polly waited, watching, while the canoe with Tav, Animal, and Cub headed back across the lake. Klep's voice was warm and soft. "Tav would draw a line between the two of you." Polly turned the canoe around, facing in the direction Tav had told her Tynak's village would be. "You think he loves me?" "Loves? What is loves?" Clep asked. Was it in Bishop Kaluper's notebook? "When two people really want to be together, they love each other." "Love," he repeated, "to join together. Yes, when you love someone, you would do anything to help. It is like being friends, but much more." The lines between you," he said, "they grow short, the way the line between Admiral and me came close. Close, and now it is being pulled." He looked longingly in the direction of the canoe with Admiral in it. "Yes, that is love." "You love?" "Yes, lots of people." "Love who?" "Oh, my parents and my grandparents and my brothers and sisters." "But you do not join together with them as one." "No, that is different. My mother and father, they are one that way, and my grandparents." "You and Tav?" She shook her head. "You have to know someone for more than a few days. If things were different, if 3,000 years didn't separate us, if totally alien views of the universe didn't separate us, if we had a lot of time together, then maybe. Animal and I have not a lot of time, but the line is strong." Yes, Clep and Animal reached out for each other as Polly would reach out for Tav, but Clep and Animal were not separated by thousands of years, and if Animal was a druid, Clep would one day lead his tribe, having been born under a great omen. "If rain comes, if my people no longer steal cattle and sheep from your people, Romeo and Juliet all over again." Or, presaging the people across the lake versus the people of the wind. "I hope it will work out for you," Polly said. "It would be—" She had no word for suitable or appropriate. "Right. I would make short the line between Animal and me in a way I have never known before." There was no word for love in Klep's vocabulary, but Animal would teach him. They were nearing the shore. Polly could see a shadow, someone standing there waiting. She drove the paddle deep into the water and sent the canoe sliding onto the pebbly sand. She jumped out and pulled the canoe far enough onto the shore so that it would not slide back into the lake. Og was at her side. The shadow came toward her. It was Tynak. "I have brought Clep to you," she said. She was a goddess. She simply smiled at Tynak when he questioned her. "I have brought him to you. Isn't that enough?" She was surprised at the haughtiness in her voice. As for Clep, he too smiled and said nothing. Pushing himself up with his arms, he looked about his village, and Polly recognized anew how much larger it was than the village of the people of the wind. Tynak summoned 4 young men, who carried Clep to his tent, and it was one of the largest tents on the compound. Tynak and Polly followed, Polly making sure that Clep's leg was not jolted. Og trotted by her side, occasionally reaching out to nudge her hand. He was not going to leave her. Clep was placed on his pallet, over which hung a great rack of antlers, even larger than the one in Dr. Louise's kitchen. "When daylight comes," Tynak said, "the healer will look at your leg." Clep replied, "My leg is good. He he indicated Polly, has the healing powers of the goddess. Polly had stopped, feeling goddess-like. Clep asked, are you cold? Even in Animal's sheepskin garment, she still felt the cold from the lake. Drawing herself up again, she ordered Tynak, have someone bring me my coat. Not only would it feel comforting and familiar, but she wanted to know whether or not Tynak had taken Zachary's icon. He spoke to one of the men who had carried Clep. Quick! The man ran off swiftly. Clep spoke to Tynak. Across the lake I was well treated. Tynak nodded. Brown Earth told us the same. I was not treated as a prisoner or an enemy. I was treated as a friend. Tynak shrugged. Trust easily come by, can vanish as easily. Clep asked, where is the young man Zach? In my tent. See, I am treating him with kindness. Is he well? Again Tynak shrugged. The healer will tell. The man came back with Polly's red anorak, and she put it on over Animal's tunic, feeling in the pockets. The icon was gone. That was not surprising. She pulled out the flashlight and shone it directly in Tynak's eyes. Give me my angel, she demanded. Tynak put his hands to his eyes in terror. She turned the flashlight off, then on again. Give me my angel! Tynak shook his head, though the flashlight had shaken him badly. Polly kept shining into his eyes, and he turned away. The icon of the angel has no power in itself. The power of the angel is for me, she touched her chest. If you try to keep it, it will turn against you. Tomorrow, he promised. Tomorrow. Where had he hidden it? She had flicked off the flashlight. Light that does not burn, she said. She turned the flashlight on again, not to blind Tynak with his beam, but to give more light to the tent, and she could see that there were beads of sweat on Klep's forehead and upper lip. The trip across the lake and then to his tent had been hard on him. Polly pointed to him with the light. He needs rest. Someone should be near in case he calls. Tynak understood. Doe will stay. I want to go now, Polly said. I am tired and wish to rest. She moved toward the tent flap, Og beside her. Tynak bowed and escorted her back to the lean-to, taking care not to get too close to Og. They were followed by two of the men who had carried Clep, not Brown Earth, but Onion and another man, squat and strong. Tynak spoke to them rapidly and sharply, then he bowed and turned back toward Klep's tent. The two men stationed themselves on either side of the lean-to. She was being guarded. She had proven that she could escape, and Tynak was going to see that this would not happen again. Polly went into the lean-to and pulled on her jeans under the sheepskin tunic. She was shivering with exhaustion as well as cold. She zipped up the anorak, then wrapped herself in the fur. She was so tired that she almost fell down on the pallet. Og lay beside her, warming her. When she woke to daylight, Tynak was again squatting at the entrance to the lean-to, watching her, eyeing Og, who was sitting up beside Polly, his ears alert. Her two guards had drawn respectfully away a few yards, but they were still there. It was one day off full moon. She sat up, regarded Tynak in silence for a moment, then demanded in a tone she hoped befitted a goddess, Bring me my angel, now! He looked at her, and his eyes were crafty. She felt in the anorak pockets and pulled out the notebook and pen. She opened the notebook, which must have been used by her grandfather, for the first pages were filled with incomprehensible equations in his scratchy writing. She held them up to Tynak, then she turned to an empty page, took the cap off the pen. She was no artist, but she managed a recognizable likeness of the old man. She held it out to him, snatched it back as he reached for it. Power, she said. It has great power. Bring me angel icon. Bring me Zachary. Bring me healer. He stood, held out his hand again. Icon? Picture of you is not icon. You bring me icon, angel. I give you picture. Picture. His hand reached for it. Not now, when you come back with angel. He left, walking with what dignity he could. The two guards drew in closer to the lean-to. After a few minutes, Polly was brought a bowl of gruel by Doe, who looked fearfully at the dog. Polly took the bowl, said thank you, and put her hand on Og's neck. He won't hurt you. Og's tail swished gently back and forth. Doe smiled, not coming closer, but standing and watching Polly. It was obvious that she would have liked to talk if she could. Polly thought it was not only Og or the language difficulty. She suspected that Tynak had forbidden conversation. Klep says careful, Joe warned. Careful. One of the guards peered at them. Thanks, Polly said softly as the girl hurried away. She ate the gruel, which was dull but nourishing. It made her appreciate her grandmother's oatmeal. Would she ever have that again? She put the bowl down at the entrance of the lean-to and waited. Waited. The great oak trunk behind the lean-to rose up high into the sky, much higher than the grandfather oak. Polly listened and seemed to hear the heart-throb of a huge tree, the sap within the veins running slowly as it drew in for the winter. Patience, do not fear. A star line touches my roots, and my roots are under you. The wind stirred the branches, ruffled the waters of the lake. It was a warm wind, unseasonably warm. Listen to the heart of the oak. We are with you. Last night the water carried you safely. Trust us. Yes, she would trust. The universe is a universe. Everything is connected by the love of the Creator. It was as Anarol had said. It was people who caused problems, and the dark angels, who were separators, added to the damage. She waited. Og lay beside her, his tail across her legs. Suddenly he jumped to his feet, tail down, hair bristling. Tynak. He handed Polly the icon. She took it and put it back in her anorak pocket, then drew out the notebook and tore out the page on which she had sketched Tynak and gave it to him. He held it up, looked at it, turned the page over, saw only the blank page, and turned back to the sketch, touched himself, touched the piece of paper, then put it carefully in his tunic. Satisfied, he gestured that she was to follow him. Leave, he gestured toward Og. No, Og goes with me. Tynak shook his head, but set off across the compound, looking back to see that Polly was following him. Several paces behind Polly, the two guards moved silently. Og walked slightly in front of her, putting himself between Polly and Tynak. The chief of the people across the lake led her to a tent considerably larger than the others. The flap was pegged open, and she could see inside. Zachary had been right. On poles stuck deep in the earth of the tent were skulls. Zachary was there, and an old man, far older than Tynak, thin and brittle as a winter leaf, but his face had a child's openness, and his eyes were kind. He looked at Og questioningly, and Polly gestured to the dog that he was to lie down. Where have you been? Zachary's voice shook with anxiety. We were frantic. Where were you? He rose from his pallet, his hair slightly damp, his eyes dark with fear. When she did not answer, he gestured to the old man. This is their healer. He won't touch me without you. Polly looked at the old man and bowed slightly. He smiled at her, and it was a child's smile, radiant and without fear. He pointed at her hair, nodding, as though both surprised and satisfied. Then he looked at Tynak, pointed again at Polly's hair. Zachary said, They think your red hair is another sign that you are a goddess. They go in for a lot of signs, these people. Now will you get the old man to take care of me? You may examine Zachary's heart, she said, and the role of goddess was not comfortable. She pressed her hand against her own chest and pointed to Zachary's. The old healer indicated that Zachary was to lie down, then he knelt beside him. He took Zachary's wrist in both hands, touched it very lightly just above the palm, listening intently, his eyes closed. Occasionally he lifted his fingers from Zachary's pulse, lightly, seeming to hover over his wrist like a butterfly, or like a dragonfly over the waters of the lake. Then the fingers would drop again gently. After a while he looked up at Polly with a slightly questioning regard. She nodded, and he looked at Zachary again, indicating that he was to remove his jacket and shirt. Obediently, Zachary complied, fingers shaking, then lay back down. The old healer knelt and bent over him, holding his hands stretched out about an inch above Zachary's chest, moving his fingers delicately, cautiously in concentric circles. After a long time, he touched the tips of his fingers against Zachary's skin. The healer waited, touching again, then hovering. Polly could almost see wings quivering. His palms pressed against Zachary's chest. The old man leaned so that his whole weight was on his hands. After a moment, he lifted his hands and sat back on his heels, his body drooping. His whole focus had been intensely on Zachary for at least half an hour. He looked at Polly and shook his head slightly. Big hurt in heart. Zachary cried out, Can you fix it? The healer spoke to Tynak, and Polly could not understand him, except that he was saying something about Klep. Tynak said, You, goddess, did help Clep. Help this Zack. Polly gestured. I only held Clep's hands while Cub set his leg. I would help if I could, but I have no training as a healer. She could not tell whether they understood her or not. The old healer indicated that he wanted to see her hands. Polly held them out, and he took them in his, looking at them back and front, nodding, making little sounds of approval. He held out his own hands again, then indicated that he wanted Polly to hold her hands over Zachary's chest as he was doing. Stay, she said firmly to Og, and knelt beside the healer. He put his hands over hers, and together they explored the air over Zachary's chest, and she felt a strange tingling in her palms, and her hands were no longer ordinary hands, and they were not functioning in ordinary time. She did not know how long their 4 hands explored, moved, touched Zachary's heart without ever touching his skin. Slowly, discomfort moved into her hands, and a feeling of dissonance. The old healer raised his hands, and suddenly Polly's fingers were icy. She looked at the healer. Power, he said. Good power. Not enough. What is he saying? Zachary demanded. He's saying that together we have good power. You're not a doctor, Zachary said. Does he know what he's doing? Yes, I think he does. She wondered what Dr. Louise would feel. You really do? Zachary, these people don't think in the same way that we do. They look at healing in a completely different way. So am I healed? She looked at the old man. Is he better? Better, not his heart? The old healer shook his head. Better, but not. What is he saying? Zachary demanded anxiously. He says your heart is somewhat better, but it is not cured. Why not? He says there is not enough power. Zachary seemed to shrink. Why not? His voice was thin, a child's wail. The healer rose and beckoned to Polly. She followed him, calling over her shoulder to Zachary. I'll be back. Og was at her heels like a shadow as she and the healer went to Klep's tent. He greeted them, smiling. The healer says, I am a marvel. You're healing well, Polly agreed. You're young and healthy. You'll be fine in a few weeks as long as you do what Anaril says and take care of yourself. The healer spoke to Klep, then bent to look at his leg, nodding in approval. Klep said, he wants you to know that you helped, but Zach's heart is bad. I know, Polly said. Oh, Klep, he is so frightened. Healer has helped. If he had more power, he could help more. Why is Zach so afraid? Life is good, but where we go next, that is good too. Zachary doesn't believe that, she said. He thinks it is bad. No, he thinks it's nothing. That he'll be gone. Klep shook his head. Poor Zach. Healer will try again, try to help. Could he, Polly wondered, when doctors with all their modern tools of surgery could not? But that the old man was truly a healer in some way, she did not yet understand, was certain. There was nothing specific for her to do. Wherever she went, the 2 guards were in the background, not approaching her, but keeping her in sight all the time. She walked around the village with Og, but the villagers were nervous about the dog and shot fearful glances at Polly. She did not understand why the fear was also angry, but there was no mistaking their antagonism. She did not know what was on Tynak's mind. He spent a long time in his tent with Zachary and came out looking at the sky as though seeking a sign. Doe brought Polly her lunch. She drew away but did not leave. Polly asked, Why must I eat alone? Doe shook her head, glanced at the guards. Tynak. Why are people afraid of me? Goddess. Doe's eyes were troubled. Where rain? Shortly after lunch, Tynak came to the lean-to. Angel? He asked. Polly brought the icon out of her anorak pocket and held it up so he could see it, but did not give it to him. Angel has power? For me, yes, for me, good power. Tynak pulled the sketch out from under his tunic. Power? Power is mine, Polly said firmly. Mine. Tynak put the sketch away. It was crumpled, as though he had shown it to many people. Come, he beckoned, and she followed him, Og at her heels. Tynak led her past the village along a narrow path through the forest of great and ancient trees until they came to a clearing. All the trees that surrounded the clearing were completely defoliated. Not a single leaf was left clinging to the branches. The trunks and limbs were dark and bare and somehow sinister. The trees farthest from the clearing held a few fading yellow leaves, so pale as to be almost white, and one by one they were drifting listlessly to the ground. In the center of the clearing was a large rock with a flat top, slightly concave. Tynek went up to it, and Polly followed him. There was a foreign chill in the air. Polly felt an oppressiveness in her chest, so that she gasped for breath. On the rock were rusty stains. Polly pointed. "What?" "Blood," Tynek said. Blood. Dried blood. So this is where sacrifices had been made, and where Tynek was considering a new sacrifice. Og growled low and deep in his throat. Polly put her hand on his head and tried to still the apprehension which prickled her skin. "Angel protect?" She tried to look haughty. "Yes." Quickly she pulled out the notebook and pen and made another sketch of Tynek. Not as good as the first, because her hands were shaking in her hurry, but still recognizable. She reached in her pocket for the scissors and cut the picture in half. Then she looked at Tynek. "Power." Tynek clutched his chest as though she had actually heard him. Polly put the pieces together, shut the notebook, and put it back in her pocket. Tynek was visibly shaken. "Angel give knife with 2 blades? Angel guards me. Og guards me. Why are you bringing me here? Place of power? Bad place," Polly said. "Good power. Makes rain. Makes Zach's heart good." "I want to talk to Zach," Polly said sharply. Tynek gave her a sly, slantwise look. "Goddess's blood has much power. Tomorrow full moon. Power." She had to ask directly. "Does Zachary know?" "Know what?" "About this place, about..." She swallowed painfully. "About my blood, giving the healer more power. Zach knows. Zach wants." "Suppose," Polly said, "I am not here tomorrow. Suppose the angel takes me away." Tynek glanced at the 2 guards standing uneasily at the outside of the circle. "No, angel not take you away." "And if it rains before tomorrow?" Tynek clapped his hands. "Good, more power." "And the healer will help Zachary?" Tynek shrugged. "If healer has enough power, will help." Og's growl was low and deep and menacing. "Stop," Tynek said. She pressed her hand against Og's head. Tynek would not hesitate to kill Og if it would make it easier for himself or for whomever he would order to capture Polly, to drag her to this clearing with the terrible stone, to add her blood to the blood that had been shed there through the years. Yes, Tynek would kill Og if he thought that would lessen her power. Og, if he was not killed first, would not let Polly be taken without a fight. But Og could not hold out against an entire tribe. She looked at Tynek and decided that the only reason he had not already killed the dog was a superstitious fear that Polly and the angel's powers would wreak vengeance. What was there to do? Her heart was thumping painfully, heavy as a stone. Was that how Zachary's heart felt all the time? Tynek turned away from the dreadful rock and led her back to the lean-to. The 2 guards drew near again. One had a bow and arrow, the other a spear. She might be a goddess. She was also a prisoner. After Tynek left, she walked out of the lean-to, passing between the guards, and they followed her, silently, as she went to the lake. "Go, Og!" she cried, and the dog ran into the lake and swam rapidly. She swung round on the 2 men, stopping the one who was fitting an arrow to his bow. "No!" she ordered. The 2 men looked at each other, not knowing what to do. When one hefted his spear, she hit his arm sharply. She was sure that they had been told not to hurt her. Her blood was too valuable to be spilled other than ritually. She watched until Og was barely visible, certainly out of range of the arrow or spear, swimming strongly away from them. Then she went back to the lean-to, and the young man with the bow and arrows hurried away, no doubt to report to Tynek. She had sent Og off, and that was all she could do. She sat on the pallet. Did Zachary know what he was doing? Had Tynek somehow promised him that the healer would cure him if he had just a little more power, and Polly's blood would give him that power? She did not know him well enough to guess whether or not in his extremity he would willingly, knowingly let her be killed in the hope that his heart could be mended. She thought of the healer holding his hands over Zachary with the delicacy of a butterfly, of her own experience of the healer holding his hands over hers as warmth flowed through them. There had been incredible power and beauty in the old man's hands. Could he be a healer and yet with his healing hands take her blood to enhance his power? Could benign power and malign power work together? Mana power and taboo power were each aspects of power itself. She, Polly, meant nothing to the healer. He operated from a completely different view of the universe from hers, and she could not superimpose her moves on him. There were skulls in Tynak's tent. She was 3,000 years from home. She tried to breathe slowly, calmly, tried to pray. Bishop Kalubra had made it quite clear that although Jesus of Nazareth was not to be born for another 1,000 years, Christ always was. She turned to the words of a hymn that had long been a favorite of the O'Keefe family. Christ be with me, Christ within me, Christ behind me, Christ before me, Christ beside me, Christ to win me, Christ to comfort and restore me. She lay back on the pallet, her hands behind her head, looking up at the leather roof of the lean-to. In the bright sunlight, patterns of oak branches moved across in a gentle rhythm. Shh, breathe softly, Polly. Do not panic. The sap moving like blood in the veins of the oak followed the rhythm of her words. Christ beneath me, Christ above me, Christ in quiet, Christ in danger, Christ in hearts of all that love me, Christ in mouth of friend and stranger. Would Bishop Kalubra call it a rune? A rune used for succor, for help? And she was calling on Christ for help. Danger. She knew that she was in danger. From all sides, the healer needed more power. From Zachary's heart, Tynak needed power for rain. Christ in the hearts of all that love me. Right now, she was more aware of her grandparents, of the bishop and Dr. Louise, than she was of her parents and brothers and sisters, who knew nothing of what was going on. The bishop, Corrales, Annie, Cub, Tav, they were across the lake waiting. They loved her. They held her in their hearts. What would they think when Og came? They would know that she had sent him. What would they do? Christ in mouth of friend and stranger. Corrales and Anirul were no longer strangers. They were friends. Cub was like a little brother. Tav, she was in Tav's heart. Klep had talked of the lines between himself and Anirul, between Tav and Polly. Love, stranger. Tynak was still a stranger. There was no line between Polly and Tynak, but there was between Polly and the healer. Surely the loving power of Christ had been in those delicate hands as they explored Zachary's pulse, breath, heartbeat. And there was a line, and was there a line between Polly and Zachary? Did one choose where the lines were going to go? If Zachary was truly willing to attempt to save his own life by urging Polly to be sacrificed, what happened to the line? Where was Christ? She was sure that the bishop would say that there was no place where Christ could not be. Where was Christ in her own heart? She felt nothing but rebellion and rejection of the clearing in the woods with the terrible stone. She thought of Dr. Louise's words about a blood transfusion. If she could save one of her brothers or sisters by offering all of her blood, would she do it? She did not know. 1,000 years away, that blood had been freely given. That was enough. She did not have to understand. A light breeze, warm, not cold, slipped under the lean-to and touched her cheeks. Little waves lapped quietly against the shore. The oak tree spread its powerful branches above her. Beneath the ground where she lay, the tree's roots were spread from the trunk in all directions. Lines of power, tree roots reaching down to the center of the earth, to the deep fires that kept the heart of the planet alive. The branches reached toward the lake, pointed across the lake to where people who loved her were waiting. The highest branches stretched up to the stars, completing the pattern of lines of love. The breeze moved in the oak tree. A leaf drifted down to the roof of the lean-to, and she could see its shadow. She listened, and a calm strength slowly began to move through her. Her peace was broken by the two guards summoning her. The one with the spear banged it on the ground. The one with the bow and arrow reached down to pull her up. She shook him off and stood, putting her anorak on over the sheepskin tunic. Though the day was warm, the two men looked in awe as she pulled up the zipper. Here was a showing of power she hadn't even thought about. She reached her hand into the pocket to make sure the icon was there. If she knew their names, they would have less power over her. I am Polly, not goddess. Polly. You are? She looked questioningly at the man with the bow and arrow. Polly, you? Winterfrost, he said reluctantly. And you? She looked at the man with the spear. Polly, you? Dark Swallow. Thank you, Winterfrost, Dark Swallow. You have beautiful names. Even if they did not understand her words, she could convey something with her voice. Dark Swallow led the way. Polly followed behind him, wishing that Og were trotting along beside her, at the same time that she was visualizing Og swimming ashore, letting the people of the wind know that she was in trouble. But what could they do? They were a small tribe, less than half the size of the people across the lake. Her steps lagged, and Winterfrost prodded her with his bow. They were taking her to the clearing in the forest, the clearing where the surrounding trees had lost all their leaves, where the great bloodied rock waited. But it was daylight, full daylight. They would do nothing until night and moonrise. Even so, she hung back, and Winterfrost prodded her again. Tynak and the healer were there. Tynak nodded at the guards, who retreated well out of the open circle, waiting. Tynak and the healer both spoke at once, then Tynak, then the healer, a scrambling of staccato words which Polly found it impossible to understand. Slow, she urged them. Please, speak more slow. They tried, but still she caught only words and phrases. They kept repeating until she understood that they were asking her if she, a goddess, was immortal, if she was placed on the sacrificial rock, and if her blood was taken so that the healer's power was augmented, would she be dead, really dead, or would she, a goddess, rise up? She held out her hands, palms up. I am mortal like you. When I die, I am dead like anybody else. Did he understand? They looked at her, frowning, so she tried again. This body, it is mortal. If you take my blood from me, this body will die. The healer took her hands in his, which trembled slightly. When he had held them over Zachary, they had moved like a butterfly, but they had not trembled. He looked carefully at the palms of her hands, then the back, then the palms again. Do you really believe, she asked, that my blood will give you enough strength so that you can cure Zachary's heart? You are a healer. Do you really believe that you need my blood? There was no way he could understand her, but she asked anyhow. He shook his head, and his eyes were sad. Suddenly, she had an idea. She took Anirul's little gold knife out of her anorak pocket and opened it. Quickly, she made a small cut in her forearm, held it out to the healer so that he could see the blood which welled out of the cut. Will that do? With one finger, he touched a drop of blood, held his finger to his nose, to his mouth. Not enough, Tynak shouted. Not enough! Polly continued to hold her arm out, but the healer shook his head. She remembered that Anirul had given her a band-aid as well as a little knife. She felt for it in her pockets, opened it, and put it over the small cut. Both the healer and Tynak stared wide-eyed at the band-aid. But the band-aid was not particularly impressive power. If they cut her throat, was that how they did it? Or would they go for her heart itself? There was no band-aid powerful enough to staunch the blood, stop it from draining her life away. I want to speak to Zachary, she said. Zach wants not, Tynak said, not to talk with you. She spoke with all the hauteur she could summon. It makes no difference whether Zachary wants to talk to me or not. I wish to talk with him. She turned away from the two men to the path which led away from the clearing. There were the two guards barring her way. She turned imperiously. Tynak! Tynak looked at the healer. The healer nodded. Take to Zach. Zachary was sitting in the shadows within Tynak's tent. The flap was open, and the light hit the whiteness of skulls on poles, emphasized the whiteness of Zachary's face. I told you not to bring her here, he said to Tynak. Tynak and the healer simply squatted at the entrance to the tent. Polly stood in front of Zachary. Go away. He looked down at the packed earth. Zachary, why don't you want to see me? What's the point? Tonight is the full moon. So? Zachary, I need to know. Do you want them to put me on the rock and sacrifice me so that the healer can get the power of my blood? Of course I don't want that, but they won't do it. You're a goddess. Zach, you must know they're planning to sacrifice me for my blood. He shrugged, looked away. Look at me. He shook his head. How do you feel about this? He raised dark, terrified eyes. I don't go in for all that guilt stuff. But you'll let them take my blood? How can I stop them? You really think my blood will give the healer power to help your heart? Don't be silly, it's for rain. But you think the healer will use the power to make you well? Who knows? Zachary, you're willing to let me die? He shouted. Shut up! I don't have anything to do with it. Go away! She turned away from him so abruptly that she faced one of the skulls, almost bumping into it. There had once been flesh on those white bones, eyes in the sockets, lips to smile, but whoever had once fleshed the skull was 3,000 years gone, as was Tynak, as was the healer. If Zachary stayed there at her expense, if she died and if Zachary lived, he too was 3,000 years gone. It did not ease the pain of knowing that he was willing to let her be sacrificed. And that is the end of chapter 11.